right, everyone, it's officially 8:29. I see you guys are eager to get started. Quick announcement. If you're interested, this group has an H&I commitment every Sunday night in Quakertown. If you're interested in that, see us after the meeting. It's really powerful to have people from the outside come in, bear witness, give a message of hope and recovery to people who are sitting in treatment centers with no hope at all. You know, we try to buy a lot of, we spend a lot of money. You guys contribute so much to the big books that we bought in the last couple of years. Like, I think it's like 700 and something big books we gave away. The treatment centers, the people who are in there don't have access to that. And hopefully we bring a message of hope and recovery, and that's what this whole program's about. There's tons of events that went on today, and I think there's some tomorrow. There's a flyer back there for a pig roast that was postponed from last month. It's in, what the heck is it, Allentown or something like that. So if you're looking for a place, grab those flyers. If you have flyers of any events, we would like to have them. Please put them on the table here. If not, post them in our Facebook group, because it keeps everybody in AA connected. I always say, if you're bored in AA, you're missing them. There's something everywhere. Everybody's been running around, and I think that's a big part of recovery, is getting out there, getting connected, and seeing how big AA is and how much it has to offer. And speaking of how big AA is, we have the world's greatest chairwoman today, brought her all the way in from Canada. Let's give her a warm welcome, Kara.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Karen, and I am an alcoholic. This is a 1-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday evening at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, 301 North Main Street, Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Food and fellowship starts at 8 p.m. and speaker at 8:30 p.m. The business meeting for this group meets every Saturday at 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. right here. Please come early and join us. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through the practice and teachings of the 12 steps. We record all speakers so that others may benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. Is there anyone new or from out of town that would like to introduce themselves with their first name?
Alcoholic named Blaze, visitor from Scranton.
Hello, Wade. Welcome. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. Would anyone with the working knowledge of the 12 steps and is willing to sponsor, please raise your hands. Are there any announcements for the good of AA? Our sister group is a big book study meeting that meets every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. just up the street at Salem UCC Church, 186 East Court Street, Doylestown. Coffee is on at 6:15. We have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone willing to make donations for the purpose of big books and CDs to help those who cannot afford them can put donations in the jar on the table marked Big Book and CD donations. All CDs are available free of charge. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and our Facebook group. Subscribe and share. You can find our speakers there. Join our Facebook page to keep informed and share upcoming events and meetings. Now I would like to introduce Paul. He's going to come up and read Just for Today, Prayer of Recovery. Let's give him a warm welcome. Woo!
Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul, and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome home. Just for today, I will be agreeable. I will look as well as I can, dress becomingly, talk low, act courteously, criticize not one bit, not find fault with anything, and not try to improve or regulate anybody except myself. And let's give a warm welcome to Will for the preamble.
Welcome home, everybody. I'm Will, and I'm an alcoholic. Alcohol Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Now I have Brian to come up and read the 12 steps to recovery.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian, and I am an alcoholic. These are the 12 steps of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the results of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And with that, let's welcome Kara back up here. She's going to introduce our speaker for tonight.
The 7 tradition states every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. At this time, I would like to pass the basket. We have no dues or fees, but we have expenses. This group provides many services. Your donations cover food, rent, big book CDs, events, workshops, etc. There is absolutely no smoking on church property. Please take a moment to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. Now, I would like to introduce the speaker as a good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group. Let's give Kat a warm welcome. She came up all the way from Philadelphia. Woo!
My name is Kat, and I'm a recovered alcoholic. I'd like to thank the group for having me here tonight. I'm very excited, but also very nervous. I feel that I get really nervous before I talk almost every single time. And each subsequent time, I always, kind of question, well, why are you nervous this time? You're sober a little bit longer, or you're connected a little bit deeper, and why does this nervousness come up? And I think that that's just natural and okay, and I try to just pause and take a step back and remind myself that the best thing that I can do is just get out of my own way and make enough room for God to show up and flow through me so that whatever needs to be heard, hopefully I say. And if not, then, oh well. I have a sobriety date. My sobriety date is August 20th, 2017. I have a home group. It's the Firing Line Big Book group. We meet every Monday night at 6 p.m. on Zoom. We go line by line through the Big Book, starting at the title page through Dr. Bob's Nightmare, and then we start back all over again. We have a different speaker come every week to read line by line, break down what they read, share their experience. This meeting didn't exist before the pandemic. It was born when all the meetings shut down by a couple out of Baltimore, and we were meeting 5 nights a week for a while. In 2020, 2021, And I had some transformative experiences coming and listening to that group and becoming a part of that group and eventually speaking at that group and hearing people show up with so much enthusiasm, not only to break down, what the authors of the book wrote, but to share their experience with, following or sometimes not following the directions in the book and the results that they got as a result of that. I have a sponsor. She's here. She knows she's my sponsor. She's not a sponsor in name or a temporary sponsor. I've had an experience with the 12 steps as outlined in the big book. I have the privilege and honor of sponsoring other women. I'm in service at my home group and in AA when asked to be. And the only reason I mention any of those things is 26 years ago was the first time I came into these rooms, and I didn't do a single thing that I just mentioned, except get a sobriety date or get a dry date. I did not get a sponsor. I did not work the steps. I did not even know what a big book was. I didn't know the steps were in this book. I just thought they existed on the wall, at meeting rooms. I didn't have any sort of spiritual experience. I didn't get the pleasure of working with others. And as a result of not doing any of those things, I never enjoyed one day of actual sobriety. There were periods of time that were usually very brief, that I was abstinent, that at the time I called being sober. But looking back now, any amount of time that I managed to string together where I wasn't putting alcohol into my body was more painful and more torturous than the days and weeks and months and years that I just drowned myself in vodka. Those periods of abstinence were absolutely unbearable and without fail would always drive me back out to drink, drive me out of the rooms. I didn't understand that I was an alcoholic until 2017 when I wandered back into the room. I had no idea what alcoholism was, what I really suffered from, or what it was going to take to recover from what I suffered from. I always get nervous about where to start after I say all of those necessary details. I remember the first time I spoke, I spent so much time in what it was like when I was little, right? And I think the only important thing about what it was like when I was a little girl, like my earliest memories of just being absolutely full of fear, being driven by 100 forms of fear when I was so little that it was before anyone ever did anything or ever said anything to cause me to be fearful. I remember being painfully shy. I couldn't look people in the eye. I was so obese and overweight, my physical skin literally didn't fit. I just felt so less than and apart from and separated from everyone around me, whether it was strangers, whether it was friends and family that I knew loved me. There was just this separation. Before 2017, before coming back in and finally understanding what it was that I suffered from and having an experience with these steps and connecting to a higher power, I would have told you that what happened in my childhood is what made me an alcoholic. I would have told you that, kids torturing me and teasing me and picking on me and bullying me in grade school is what drove me to drink and become out of control. I would have told you that my parents, who did their best to love each other and that did their best to love me and my younger siblings, but fought all the time and just, flooded the house with a lot of psychological abuse, that's what made me alcoholic. I would have told you, one of a dozen different, relationships that, were physically and mentally and sexually abusive. Those were the things that drove me to become alcoholic. And the reason I know that's not true today, other than finally understanding what it means to be really alcoholic, is that I've heard people speak from podiums like this who, say they've had a perfect childhood, where there was no abuse, there was no teasing, there was no separation. There was none of these things that happened that drove them to drink, but they still were driven by some form of something, right? Which I come to discover as spiritual disease, right? That they were driven to seek ease and comfort in alcohol. And so just because, crappy things happened when I was younger, that's not what made me alcoholic, even though, as I began to seek ease and comfort and escape in a bottle, I was convinced that those were the things that made me drink the way that I drank, right? I don't remember my first drink. I do know that I never had one of anything, and I never had the desire to have one of anything. I know that I didn't have access to alcohol, like constant access to alcohol as a teenager, but I would drink as often as I could, which wasn't that often. But looking back on it now, I know that I had zero control over the amount that I would take when I started to drink. And that didn't seem alcoholic at the time because I was a teenager and I wasn't expected to control my drinking, something that I just started to experiment with. So it seemed like it was okay that I drank too much or I missed the mark and I passed out or I blacked out, right? But that continued as I continued to drink and continued to drink more often. After high school, I started to work in the service industry, bartending and working at nightclubs. So I was underage, not legally allowed to drink, but legally allowed to serve other people alcohol, and had access to alcohol. And my drinking was so out of control back then that I would, again, black out, pass out, be vomiting in the bathroom, like way too early in the night. At the time, this would have been like the late 90s, it seemed like everyone was drinking and doing the Scarface form of alcohol, and that was readily available, and that was given to me, and that was a solution, right, to be able to not control my out-of-control drinking, but to enable me to drink the way that I wanted to drink and not go straight to blacking out, right? And so that became the routine for a while, and one day a girl gave me a bag of something I thought was going to pick me up, and it brought me way, way down, and I got strung out on the train spotting form of alcohol. And for a very long time, at that time, if you would have asked me, I absolutely wouldn't have been able to say that I was an alcoholic, because I didn't understand what an alcoholic was, right? And I would have only been able to admit that I was a drug addict. But the reason why I was able to admit that I was a drug addict was because I thought that what made me a drug addict was getting physically addicted to this substance, right? I didn't take into consideration that if anyone used a physically addictive substance for long enough, they would become physically dependent. I didn't have any awareness that the times in between getting strung out, I was just as sick and suffering from this untreated alcoholism as when I was, physically strung out. And for several years, I was stuck in that cycle. I eventually went to treatment, and it was just this like merry-go-round of detox, rehab, relapse, repeat, right? I'd go into detox, I'd stay for inpatient, I'd hear a lot about like the action of drugs and alcohol on the brain and the action of drugs and alcohol on the body. I don't remember hearing about the action of drugs and alcohol on the alcoholic brain and body. I don't know if that makes sense, but I heard like, if you're going to be doing a depressant, it does this to your heart. If you're doing a stimulant, it does this to your heart, and these are the negative effects. I personally don't remember being given the information that our brains and bodies are different because we're alcoholic, right? I would go to outpatient. I was told to do 90 and 90. I started in another fellowship at first. It seemed a lot like group therapy, which never seemed to have any sort of like positive lasting results. And I think someone saw me after a meeting in this other fellowship one day and saw that I was struggling, and they made the suggestion that I try out a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember laughing out loud and saying, like, no one is talking to me about my drinking. Why would I go to Alcoholics Anonymous? I'm not an alcoholic. And I think their suggestion was that I might find some people there who had an actual solution, who might be able to give me some direction, and that it might be easier to listen to people talk about drinking than it was to listen to people talk about war stories of using. And so I started to check out some AA meetings, and it was a little bit easier because I heard less talking about the actual drinking and more talking about this, life of being happy, joyous, and free, but I still didn't hear any solution, right? The meetings that I went to in like 1998, 1999, at least the ones that I attended, no one was talking about the steps as outlined in the big book. I mentioned earlier that I didn't even know that there was a big book. I would go to meetings and there would be like a table at the front with a little book stand, and there was this, navy blue kind of book on the front, and they kept talking about the big book, and I thought they meant the good book, so I thought they were talking about the Bible, and I thought you were a bunch of liars because you told me that this was not a religious program, but I thought you had the Bible displayed at the front of the meeting room, and I had no idea that these steps were outlined in the book with specific directions on how to take these steps, and I never got a sponsor. I think I got temporary sponsors, which when I got my sponsor back in 2017, she's like, there's really no such thing as a temporary sponsor unless you want temporary sobriety. And, any kind of temporary sponsor I got was temporary, was sponsor in name only, just so I could go home and tell my parents that, oh, I got this sponsor thing. I didn't hear a lot of information on either the problem or the solution, at least at the meetings that I was going to, which isn't to say it wasn't being shared. I think that I probably heard what I wanted to hear and ignored a lot. I don't remember anyone approaching me the way in which my sponsor did back in 2017, but if they were following the directions that are outlined and working with others, it was probably painfully obvious to them that I was not ready to do any of this work, right? So they probably, followed those directions to a T and, reached out their hand in friendship and fellowship and then let me be on my way if I wasn't ready to get down into the work, which I was absolutely not at that point in time. So I continued that merry-go-round of relapse, rehab, repeat for several years. I finally got off of the train-spotting form of alcohol and immediately was back in that intolerable condition internally where I needed relief. And I am sure that someone at some point along the way told me that it was not safe to drink alcohol, but I didn't hear it or I didn't listen to it, and I went right back to drinking and right back to blacking out and passing out. And so I went right back to the Scarface form of alcohol until someone gave me the Breaking Bad form of alcohol, and the next 15 years were a blur of vodka and that Breaking Bad form of alcohol. And in my mind, this was such a better existence than when I was a strung out dope fiend, right? I never developed a physical dependence on alcohol or this other form. If I couldn't get it, if I didn't have money, I wouldn't go through physical withdrawal. I was under the delusion that I was making the choice every day to put these things into my body. I had no idea how sick I was. And eventually, back in 2016, I met a man and fell in love, and he drank, thank God, because I wasn't ready to stop drinking. And it seemed sort of like he drank like me, but he had never done any sort of, other substances. He'd never snorted anything, never shot anything. And I was faced with this predicament, like, what am I going to do? Like, I can't drink unless I have something to keep me up. And I don't know what my options are here. And I thought the first option was to tell him that I like to do this other stuff and hopefully, he would accept it. And I thought the other option was to just continue to do it behind his back and try to get away with it. And it never occurred to me that there was a third option, and the third option would be to try to put down this other stuff. And the reason why that option didn't occur to me is because if I put down this other stuff, I would have to try to control my drinking, and I couldn't even fathom doing that, like at all. I couldn't imagine stopping drinking, and I couldn't imagine trying to drink less than I did. And I didn't know why, right? So I'm a coward, so I don't tell him. I just keep doing this other stuff and get away with it for almost a full year. And the longer I got away with it, the more full of fear I became, is that he was going to find out and it was going to destroy our relationship. And I was absolutely in love with him, and I didn't know what to do. And the problem with my alcoholism, which I don't know that I'm suffering from yet, is that my alcoholism comes dressed up like mental illness. And the thing is, I had never been diagnosed with alcoholism or diagnosed myself with alcoholism, but I had dozens of doctors who had diagnosed me with mental illness, right? So I have, a list of a dozen diagnoses of, bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder and anxiety and PTSD and all these things that on the surface look like that's what I'm suffering from. And not just to me, and not just to the doctors that I go and see, but to my friends and family. And in my mind, as my drinking progressed, and I tried my final experiment towards the end of that first year of the relationship, which was to put down this other form of alcohol and try to just drink successfully. This experiment failed, like, completely. As soon as I put down this other form of alcohol and tried to just depend on drinking, I was so much more out of control than I had ever been. I had absolutely zero control of how much I would drink and for how long, and how quickly I would go right to blacking out. I would wake up in the morning full of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, asking myself how this could have happened again, how I could have gotten to the point where I was so obliterated that I don't remember where I went, what I said, what I did, who I hurt, but the look on the face of the man, you know, in the bed next to me, we just told this tale that it was atrocious, right? And it was it's almost worse the mornings that I woke up and had no recollection of what I had said or done, right? Because it could have been anything. And my intention was never to cause harm, but I just kept causing harm over and over and over again. And every single time I would promise myself that it wouldn't happen, or I wouldn't let it get that out of control. It would happen again, it would get even more out of control, and I felt even more powerless. And I didn't know what was going on. And I started to suspect that I might have a drinking problem. And I was sort of waiting for someone to talk to me about it. Like, I was waiting for him to approach me and be like, hey, I think you're drinking too much, or you're drinking just a little too hard, or maybe you should take a week off, or I think you might be alcoholic. And he didn't come at me with that. What he came at me with was this ultimatum of, you need to get your freaking head together or we're done. So that was just sort of confirmation to me that, like, oh, it is just all this mental illness stuff that's the problem. And I drink the way that I drink because the mental piece is out of control and unmanageable. And if I could just get a handle on, you know, the right therapist or the right medication or whatever, I wouldn't need to drink the way that I drank. And but I continued to drink the way that I drank, and it got worse and worse. And I remember one night, after, you know, being given that ultimatum of getting my head together or it being over, I was sitting in front of the computer, desperate and scared and full of fear. I'd had so many bottoms in my life. I mean, the worst physical bottom was probably when I was 18 or 19 years old, like on death's door, you know, this close from overdoses, in the hospital with a staph infection from an abscess that was this close to spreading to my heart and killing me. You know, those things were bottoms that should have scared me straight, and they never had any lasting effect, right? And where I found myself back in August of 2017 was scared, alone, afraid, in front of the computer, trying to come up with a solution for what I didn't know I suffered from yet, right? So my first thought is, maybe you need to go into the psych ward, right? And I paused and I thought about that, and I knew I wasn't suicidal. I'd been suicidal before. Wherever I existed at that point in time was like worse than feeling suicidal. I don't know if that makes any sort of sense, but I was somehow like a level below feeling suicidal. I didn't even have the desire to end my life. I was just somehow stuck in this pit of darkness that was like one level deeper than that. It almost would have felt easier if I wanted to end it all, but I didn't. I just felt trapped in this darkness and I didn't know how to get out of it, right? So I considered, you know, putting myself into the psych ward, but there was something deep inside that knew it wasn't just that, right? The next thought that came to mind was, maybe you need to go into treatment. And I sat with that for a minute after kind of Googling treatment centers in the area. And I thought back to my years of experience of being in and out of treatment centers and the effect that those had. And the only positive effect that those had was they separated me from alcohol long enough to put me squarely back in the position where I was so sick and so suffering internally that I just went back out and sought the solution in alcohol, right? So I knew I didn't have a physical dependence. I didn't need a medical detox or anything like that. And I had this sense that if I checked myself into treatment, I'd just sort of be hiding out for whatever length of time my insurance would cover. And then I'd be discharged and I'd be right back where I was. And the next thought that I had was, I wish there was a room full of people who understand what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling, that I could talk to or that I could just listen to, because I was too afraid to even open up my mouth and talk to anyone. And for a moment, that noise, that incessant, loud, staticky chatter noise that is like constantly playing in my mind, it was like someone reached in and turned the volume down, and it got very quiet, And what I heard, not in my voice, I believe it was the spirit of the universe, which used language a little more harsher than what I'll use tonight, but it said, "That's AA, you idiot. Go find a meeting," right? And so I Googled AA in my area, and I found a meeting. And I went in, and it was a tiny little church basement, and there was a big table with chairs around it, and then chairs around the perimeter of the room, but like really close. And I was trying to figure out, like, where does the chairperson sit? What's the back of the room? I wanted to hide out in the very back corner. I pick one corner. It ends up being right next to where the chairperson is. This like short, like bubbly girl covered in tattoos, which I don't know if you can see, but I'm covered in tattoos, with blue hair comes in and she says, "Hey, my name's Kat, what's your name?" And I'm like, "Hi, my name's Kat." And we had a chuckle, and she welcomed me, and they started the meeting. They told me to keep coming back. They passed around a phone list, and they said there was a meeting there in a couple days, and I came back. And I attended the second meeting back, and after the meeting ended, because I had raised my hand again to say that I was a newcomer, you know, a gaggle of women kind of descended upon me, and it felt very frenetic and overwhelming. And I could see a woman kind of hanging out in the back corner, and she waited until everyone sort of like filtered out, and then she came over and she approached me, and she did something that had never been done before, right? What I remember from meetings, you know, 25 years ago, 26 years ago was, you know, just don't drink and make a meeting. Meeting makers make it. Think, think, think. Stay away from people, places, and things. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, but I didn't even know what the it I was supposed to work was back then, right? The woman who approached me 7 years ago came over in a very calm kind of manner. She introduced herself. She asked me like 1 or 2 questions about myself and my drinking, right? I was so used to people grilling me about my drinking, how much, how often, this, that, and all this stuff. She asked me like 1 or 2 questions. It wasn't even so much about my drinking. It was just like, have you ever been to AA before? And have you ever worked the steps as outlined in the big book with a sponsor? And I gave her my answers. And as soon as I answered those 2 questions, she started to talk about herself and the way that she used to think and the way that she used to feel and the way that she used to drink. And I was like, who is this lunatic? And why is she talking to me about how she used to think and feel and drink? It was so bizarre. No one had ever done this with me, right? And as she continued on, something mysterious started to happen. I was like, wait a second. I think those things. Like, I'm thinking those things right now. I feel that way, and I drink that way. And she continued like this for a couple minutes, right? And then she started to commence to talk about herself as an alcoholic. And something even more mysterious happened, which was I started to ask myself, holy cow, are you already an alcoholic? Like, because you're just like this woman, right? And like, this is how sick I was. This is how dependent on alcohol as a solution, how much I was depending on alcohol as a solution. Towards the end of my drinking, like, I knew exactly how much train spotting that form of alcohol I could use for how many days in a row before I would get physically dependent. So like times when that was my jam, I knew how to space it out if I didn't want to get strung out. Towards the end of my drinking, when I started to fear that I might be on my way to become an alcoholic, I Googled, like, I'm a female, I weigh this much, I am this tall, this is how much I drink, how often, how long until I develop a physical dependence. Like, I wanted to know. I wanted to know how much more time I had of drinking before I would become dependent, right? Because then I knew I wouldn't be able to hide my alcoholism. Like, unbeknownst to me, I wasn't hiding it very well from anyone. So she started to commence to talk about herself as an alcoholic, and the mysterious thing that happened next inside of my brain, I was like, because I kept saying, me too, I think, I feel, I drink like this. And as soon as she talked about herself being alcoholic, I said, wait a minute, me too? Alcoholic? Like, could I already be suffering from this thing that I was, you know, waiting to become quote unquote full blown? And the thing that didn't make sense is the person that she described herself as being didn't visually match up to the woman who was standing in front of me. She was standing in front of me with her head held high, full of dignity and grace. She wasn't talking down to me. She wasn't talking at me. She was just letting something flow out of her and into me, and it was very bizarre. And I didn't know what to make of it. But it made me curious. It made me curious about whether I already was an alcoholic, and it made me very curious to know what she had done to recover from the very thing that I was suffering from. She asked if I had a big book, and I told her no. I finally got clarity that the big book isn't the good book, and it's not a Bible. She got me a big book. She asked me to read the doctor's opinion, and we met at her house, and we went over it. And for the first time in my life, I was given access to information that blew my freaking mind. When we read that paragraph in the doctor's opinion that talks about the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is the manifestation of an allergy. I remember saying, like, hold up, I've been putting alcohol in one form or another into my body for like 26, however many years. There is no way I'm allergic to alcohol. And she's like, well, what they're talking about when they mention the word allergy is just an abnormal reaction to, right? That when us alcoholics put alcohol into our body reacts abnormally from non-alcoholic drinkers. And we went on, with the rest of that sentence that talks about that once that allergy is activated, the phenomenon of craving kicks in, right? And that once that starts, all bets are off. And something started to make a little bit of sense as we moved on and started to talk about this other piece, right? That this mental piece, this mental obsession. That's putting those two pieces together is when, this kind of light bulb clicked. I was really trying to wrap my head around things, and she asked me to think back when I was strung out on that other form of alcohol that I was physically dependent on. She's like, every time you would pick it up, was the goal to get strung out? And I would say no. She's like, you knew how long you could use and how much before that would happen. What prevented you from moderating and stopping before physical dependence kicked in? And I said, I don't know. And as we read about the allergy and the phenomenon of craving, and then the mental obsession, it all sort of started to make sense, is that when I would start to use, before I was using to prevent physical withdrawal, that phenomenon of craving was so strong that I was rendered absolutely powerless to decide how much I would drink and for how long, right? Or what else I would add into the mix. And for the first time in my life, I felt a sort of relief that there was some answer as to why that would happen to me every single time. And, it was pointed out that the only solution to prevent that phenomenon of craving is complete abstinence. The problem is that when I stay completely abstinent, in absence of a spiritual solution, my internal condition is so atrocious that without fail, I am driven from a sober state to pick back up, even though I know I'll burn my life to the ground. And the next 20-some years was just this new cycle, which was I'm restless, irritable, and discontent, and I seek ease and comfort. And I pick up and I drink, and I activate the allergy, and the phenomenon of craving takes over, and I am not in control of how much I drink or for how long. I go on a spree. My sprees were usually not days or weeks or months, they were years, right? And the deeper that I get into that, the guilt, shame, remorse, and fear settle in. I make a firm resolution not to swear off entirely. I mean, if I'm being absolutely honest, I don't think there was one time that I was ready to swear everything off entirely. The firm resolution was, I'm going to pause this thing for this day, right? Or for a week, or until someone gets off my back about it, right? I move from that into this state of uncomfortability, and the mental obsession, the curious mental twist, the mental blank spot gets me, right? And that can look like so many different things, and they're all just as sneaky and insidious, right? I get possessed by the delusion that I can control and enjoy my drinking. I am restless and irritable and discontent again. I want to seek ease and comfort, and I pick up a drink. And I repeat this cycle just for like 2 decades. And it's unbearable. And as soon as I put these pieces together, this physical and this mental piece, I had such a powerful first step experience looking back on my drinking and my periods of abstinence, that I finally understood what powerlessness was and what it was talking about. I finally understood what it meant to admit that I'm powerless over alcohol. I'm powerless over alcohol when I put it into my body, and I am just as powerless over alcohol when I refrain from putting it into my body. I'm powerless over the thought and I'm powerless over the decision of if I'll pick up a drink, or when I'll pick up a drink next. And that dash in between that first part of the first step and the second half, and that my life had become unmanageable. I thought the unmanageability they were talking about in that first step was the way my life looked as a direct result of being under the influence of alcohol, of burning my life to the ground, of burning every bridge, of just decimating personal relationships and romantic relationships and relationships with my family, of DUIs, or I only had one DUI, but of the DUI or whatever, external consequences that came about as a direct result of being under the influence. What I came to understand was that my life was unmanageable before I even picked up a drink. My life was so unmanageable, my internal condition was so atrocious. I was drowning in the bedevilments that are on page 52, where, I was full of fear, I couldn't make a living, I was useless, I had no sense of purpose, there was all of these fears, right? I was drowning in that when I was a child, before, you're expected to navigate through all of that stuff. And the sense of ease and comfort that alcohol gave me provided relief from those bedevilments, right? And the unmanageability of my life when I would be abstinent was so much worse than the unmanageability that presented as a result of being under the influence, right? What was presented to me was that my problem isn't alcohol, alcohol's my solution. My problem's lack of power, right? And the only obvious answer to lack of power is access to power. The next problem that I was presented with is that there was this astonishing pile of crap that was blocking me from this power that could solve all this, right? And that's where, I was told that the work and the steps could clear away this astonishing pile of crap so that I could, feel a connection to this power that could pull me out of this alcoholic pit. We started getting into work in the steps. I was asked to set aside my old ideas of a God that I thought was going to send me to hell, and instead try to come up with my own conception of God. I was full of fear that my conception was too little and too small, and because I couldn't define what my God meant to me, that it wasn't enough. I was absolutely willing to believe. I believed that you believed. I saw that God was working in and through other people. I was so full of fear that this God couldn't work in and through me because I hadn't nailed down exactly what God meant to me. But I did the work anyway. I was asked to turn my will and my life over to the care of this God that I didn't yet know was what it was to me. And I feel like I did that as successfully as I could in almost every area of my life, except in my romantic relationship. I clung so tightly to trying to manage and control this relationship because I was so full of fear that this power was going to come back and be like, you're not supposed to be in a relationship with this person, or you're not supposed to be in a relationship at all. And I was unwilling to entertain that. And as a direct result, I caused so much harm in this relationship in sobriety, which was so painful. When I was causing harm, when I was still drinking, that was painful too, but I just have another drink and forget about the pain that I was causing him. To cause so much pain sober, because I was unwilling to give it to God, was really a horrible, horrible thing. I got to work writing a fourth step, which was uncomfortable and awkward, and I sat down to do a fifth step, and those were things that I never thought that I'd be willing to do, and it was just through the act of continuing to pray for willingness that I was able to make it through these steps and continue on. When I got to 6 and to 7, I was sent home after my fifth step to do 6 and 7 on my own. I remember being possessed with so much fear because I thought I was doing it wrong. There were just these, 2 big individual steps with 2 tiny little paragraphs, and I was full of doubt and fear that I missed some direction and was doing something wrong. And then I had confusion because of hearing other people talking about working on their character defects. I'm like, oh crap, am I supposed to be working on these things and spinning my wheels working on them and trying to will them out of me, and until I was, directed back to exactly what the book says, which says that we don't work on these, right? We pray for the willingness and then we're entirely ready to have them removed when God sees fit. And I have so much experience with stubborn character defects staying put and teaching me such a serious lesson that had they just been poof, wiped out in an instant, I wouldn't have had the experience of the lesson of a defect just staying so stubbornly stuck for so long until I'm able to have a powerful experience and have my eyes opened, right? and to have that removed when it's, when it's supposed to be removed. I made an 8-step list. I went out and started to make direct amends, which is another thing that I never thought I would have the courage to do. It talks about in the book that a mumbling "I'm sorry" isn't going to fit the bill. I felt like my entire life had been one big mumbling "I'm sorry." I would just continue to harm and then crawl on my hands and knees and beg for forgiveness and not even be able to look you in the eye and say, "I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again," and then do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And so to be able to go to the people that I harmed and the people that I loved and look them in the eye and say, "I did this to you, you didn't deserve that, I was wrong. What can I do to make this right?" was an entirely different experience. It was an experience that not only, in certain instances, I was able to see that it set them free and then set me free. And it was the most beautiful thing in the world. And then I get to 10 and 11. And I remember when I was writing a 4th step, a lot of people in AA were running up to me and saying like, "Oh, what step are you on? We can be 10-step buddies." And I was like, "Oh, I'm writing my 4th step. I'm not even close to that step." So by the time I got to 10 and 11, my sponsor sat me down. We read through the steps, as those 2 steps as outlined in the big book, right? Because I had gotten in my mind that this 10th step was a nightly review that you text someone. I wasn't practicing the way it was outlined, that my sponsor outlined as we read through page 84 to 88, right? And so I was just texting these 10-step nightly inventories to other people in AA. And for step 11, I was only praying and meditating. I kind of forgot about the piece of increasing the conscious contact with God, right? And it wasn't until I started sponsoring someone else, I was like, wait, I'm not doing this right? I was getting in preparation to take someone through step 10 and 11. I was like, I'm not doing what the book says, right? So I circled back around. I started to have a brand new experience with this step, right? That today I rely so heavily upon. And the way that I was practicing step 10, even 5 years ago, looks different than the way that I practice it today. I think that, when I finally got straightened out on how and when to practice step 10, I was just, rigidly following those, directions, right? Watching out for resentment, selfishness, dishonesty, fear, taking those corrective measures, asking God at once to remove it, talking to someone immediately, making amends if I've harmed anyone, and turning my thoughts resolutely to someone I could help. And so as I started to practice it as it was outlined, I think the thing that I've had difficulty with at first was just remembering that I could practice it, right? So I'd be navigating through my day, there would be a hiccup, I'd bump up against some resentment, dishonesty, selfishness, and fear, and I'd fall into the pit of one of those or all of those. And then as I would start to feel like I was drowning in it, I'd be like, oh wait, I can do something, I can take some action, I can ask God to remove it, right? I can do a 10-step call. I can turn my thoughts. And so then it was just a matter of kind of getting into the swing of practicing that. And with 11, I went from just praying and just meditating to bookending my days with these practices that started to evolve and change, and as I tried to navigate through what a spiritual life or what a spiritual relationship with this power was to me. Ending my day with that 11-step nightly review, right? Quietly reflecting on my day. If I've been practicing that 10-step, once I get to the 11-step nightly inventory, I'm really aware of if I was selfish, resentful, dishonest, afraid. I'm painfully aware that if I was, thinking of myself most of the day, I probably was selfish, resentful, dishonest, or fearful. The days where I was, thinking of others and what I could pack into the stream of life, I started to see a pattern that on those days, I was less resentful, selfish, dishonest, and afraid. I would write out a plan for the day after I would finish that nightly review. Sometimes it would look like a to-do list, but it was usually accompanied with a to-be list, right? So if I got jammed up in things like selfishness, self-centeredness, tomorrow I want to be selfless. If I got jammed up with resentment and jealousy, tomorrow I want to be open-minded and compassionate. If I got jammed up with self-centered fear, tomorrow I want to just lead into God reliance. And I'd wake up in the morning and I'd look at that list, right? And I'd start this upon awakening ritual that, over the years has morphed and changed and flowed and looks very different today than it did before, and today looks different than what it looked like yesterday, and that's okay. I started to be possessed with the idea of getting back to this spiritual place where I felt like I was like vibrating on top of a mountain, because I had experienced that along the way in sobriety. And the longer I stayed sober and the more experiences I had, either working with my own sponsor or working with other women, and the less that I felt that intense, constant spiritual connection, the more I started to doubt myself and think that I wasn't doing this right, or that I was slipping, right? And I had to kind of pause. I had to talk about this with other women. I had to re-examine, like, what are my motives for chasing this and seeking this spiritual thing, right? It was very unrealistic to expect that I could exist feeling that way all the time, endlessly, forever. And that wasn't the point or the goal either. I think that the times that I've struggled, the times that I haven't had the answers, the times that I've been, you know, in a pit of despair, absolutely sober, those kinds of experiences have been more helpful and useful when it came time to start working with others. When I came back to AA in 2017, the goal wasn't to stop drinking, it was to find a way out of consequences. It was not to stop drinking forever at all. Right, and once I finally understood that I suffered from this alcoholic illness that had a mental component, a physical component, but underneath it was a spiritual component, that as soon as I started to treat with a spiritual solution, I was relieved from the bondage of self. I was relieved from the obsession to want to drink every single second of every single day. I had no idea that this was even available and on the table. I thought that I was going to come to AA and you guys were going to teach me how to not drink, and maybe I would not pick up a drink for the rest of my life, but I thought that I would be possessed by the obsession to want to drink or get high every single second until the day I died. But if I could manage not to pick up a drink, because you guys were all going to teach me how to not do that, it would be okay to suffer and want to drink every single day until I died if I just didn't pick up and I stopped causing harm. I had no idea what was on the table. I had no idea that a life beyond my wildest dreams and that freedom from this obsession was available to me if I just followed the directions in the book. One of the first things that my sponsor asked after we started working together, she's like, Kat, I'm never going to demand that you do anything that you don't want to do in this program, but one thing I expect that you will do once we've had an experience, you've had your own experience with the steps as outlined in the big book, I'm going to expect that you share your experience with other women. And because I was too afraid to say no, I told her yes. I didn't think I'd make it long enough to stick around to be helpful or useful to anyone, but when it came time to do that, it was the very thing that helped save my life as I was drowning in emotional sobriety. When I mentioned earlier that I turned everything over to the care of God as I understood God except my relationship, I was literally like on the verge of just, I don't even know what. The thought to drink didn't return, but this darkness started to settle in because I was just meddling in this relationship. And right at that time, the universe put this woman in my path who needed help and asked me to sponsor her. And I was terrified, but I said yes, and I did it anyway. And I started to sit down knee to knee with this woman and open this book. And I had so much nervousness, and I had so much self-doubt, and I had so much fear. And I remember calling my sponsor, and I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, you did this with me. I remember what you did, but I feel like I don't remember how to do it or when to do it or how. And she's like, Kat, just call me every time you have a question. That's fine. And the beautiful thing about that is that, like, that deepened and strengthened my relationship with my own sponsor. It deepened and strengthened my relationship with this power that I was depending upon. And it also taught me how to kind of show up and get out of my own way and sit down and just tell the truth. My sponsor said that you can't mess this up. If you just sit down and share your experience, the truth of your experience, there's no way that you can do this wrong, right? And she was right. And I started to have these beautiful experiences with these women who were sick and suffering and dying of the same thing that almost took my own life. And I got to see the light come on in people's eyes, which is like the most beautiful, magical gift in the world. I remember when I first started working with my first sponsor, she said, because I was having doubts, I said, listen, I'm willing to do this, but I'm so afraid it's not going to work for me, right? She said, Kat, like, so if you don't do this, what's going to happen? And I said, oh, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to drink. And she said, so if we sit down and we do this, and you drink, you're going to get the same result as if you leave and you don't do this. You're going to drink, right? She's like, why don't you just stay and give it a chance and see what happens? What do you have to lose, right? So I stayed, right? Instead of just keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back, I just stayed and I did the work. And she promised me this. She's like, I promise you, if you just stay and you remain willing and you do the work, you're not going to pick up the old broken pieces of your old life that were in shambles and kind of glue them back together in some misshapen way into a semi-new, semi-improved life. She's like, you're not just going to have like a kind of sort of better life. She's like, you're going to have a life beyond your wildest dreams. And I thought that sounds so corny, but also so attractive. And I wanted that. Like, I wanted what she had. I wanted what you guys had. And I'm so happy that I was just desperate enough to shut up and listen and take some direction, right? And about a year or so ago, my sponsor drank, and I didn't know what to do. And I dragged my heels getting a new sponsor. I didn't know what to do or who to ask or how to ask, and I just felt like I was sort of floundering, right? And my old sponsee's sister kept on me about it. She's like, have you found a new sponsor? I found a new sponsor. I'm doing step work again, and blah, 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 blah. And I was just so full of fear and everything, and we were on the phone one day, and she's like, Sarah lives right around the corner from you. She just bought a house. She's 2 blocks away. Why don't you ask her? And it was one of those things where, like, that defect of fear, that defect of, like, dragging my heels ended up being a thing that you know, put this perfect, like, connection in front of me when it did. Like, yeah, I was sponsorless for a bit, and I felt like I was floundering. But I reached out and I connected, and I'm having this brand new experience with these steps, right? I feel like the hardest thing to do is, like, navigate through emotional sobriety. Navigating through the early days of physical sobriety were hard when that obsession was still there, right? And but as I started to do the work in the steps in the beginning, that obsession was removed. Obsession was removed, and I didn't even notice it at first. Because of how much I was trying to control and manage my relationship, I was so focused on that. I was so unwilling to give that to God. I would come to meetings and cry to my sponsor, oh my God, he's going to leave me, this and that and the other thing. And she's like, Kat, have you prayed? Have you found someone to help? And I would say, yes, yes, yes. And then finally one day she's like, Kat, when's the last time you thought of, you had a drink? And I was like, I don't know, whenever we started working together. And she said, when's the last time you thought about having a drink? And I was like, I'm not sure. And she's like, Kat, when's the last time you woke up with the obsession to drink all day, every day? And it dawned on me. I was like, holy cow, the obsession's gone. The thing that I thought would be with me every single day until the day I died had been removed. And I knew that I hadn't removed it. And I knew that my sponsor hadn't reached into my brain and removed it. And I think that was like the first really powerful spiritual experience that I had, where I was absolutely aware that some power bigger than me, bigger than her, bigger than, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous as a group had worked in and through me in a way that accomplished the miraculous, right? And so with that obsession removed and that obsession remaining removed, as I start to navigate through this emotional sobriety, you know, when I come up to like a year or so ago and I don't have a sponsor, and then I connect with my new sponsor, we sit down and we start going through the steps again, and I start to have this powerful experience, this powerful first step experience where I see how much I am powerless over in my life and in what I think and in what I feel and in the situations and the people in my life that I so desperately want to control and manage. And I'm asked to look at my thoughts, right? For 2 weeks, I'm asked to just write down everything I think. And what I see really clearly is that I have 2 really distinct voices in there, right? And one of them is like, I'm tired, I'm afraid, I'm overwhelmed. And then another is like, you're lazy, you're a piece of crap, you're worthless, you don't matter to anyone. And I look at this and I'm like, this is insane. Like, is this all me, right? Because I feel tired and I feel overwhelmed and I feel all of this stuff, but this other voice, I thought that was me. Like, I thought that's what I thought about myself, and I'm able to finally clearly see for the first time, like, this is this critic right? That is just so hyper aware and critical of every single thing I do or don't do, right or wrong, right? And that I need just as much help dealing with that as I did dealing with the thought of a drink, right? I need help to admit that I'm powerless over those thoughts, and that I need to connect or reconnect to this power to help me navigate and manage through that. I'm asked to re-examine my ideas around God. I'm asked to, look at any ounce down prejudice I have towards spiritual terms. And I'm asked to kind of really take a look at where I see and where I sense God in my everyday life, which doesn't have to be, white light falling from the hospital bed kind of experience. It can be an experience with a song that I listen to. It can be an experience with my cat curled up on my lap in a way where I'm fully present and I put my freaking phone down and I stop watching TV and I just caress and pet this little animal that has allowed me to love it and be its mother and be fully present and aware. It's about showing up and being a daughter to my parents who are both very sick with cancer. It's about being in service. It's about showing up in my life and being as loving and compassionate and open-minded and understanding as I can be. It's about being a wife, which I never thought I wanted to be. And then once I was, I never thought I could be a very good one. It's about being a partner in this relationship. And it's about being a child of God. I owe every single thing in my life to Alcoholics Anonymous and to God. And thank you very much for having me here tonight.
Powerful talk. Let's thank Kat one more time. It's customary for us to form a line up here. Let's thank our speakers personally. It means a lot to them. They travel here at their own time and expense. You extend that courtesy and put your hand out and let them know. It means a lot. I know how, you sit up here and you'll talk for an hour and you think, well, is anybody even listening? What am I saying? Or did I say anything? But something connects with each and every person. And if you go and let them know that, it does mean a lot. Anyway, there's a meeting after the meeting. Hang out with us, okay? And if you'd like to care to join us, we'll end with a little circle up. We'll hold some hands. We'll say a little prayer. We'll put those chairs on the rack, and we'll try to eat the rest of them hot sausages and hot dogs and cronuts and good stuff. Next week, Mary C. is coming in. Don't miss Mary. Okay, let's grab those hands together. Let's tighten it up. Circle gets square. All right, let's take a moment of silence for the still sick and suffering. And if you care to join us, we will end with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, so work it, you're worth it.